This is going to be for Milestone 2 for my project that is English as a Second Language through simulated lecture for Indian students. The basic premise is that the app will simulate a lecture and then relevant questions being presented to the student and the student's ability to ask questions of the app. And this will be with a 3D simulated lecturer. The key components here being to address gaps in reading comprehension, lingual ability, and ability to understand lecture material, that is scientific and engineering lecture material. All of these are to be addressed with this approach. And the materials that will be used in the app will come from the standard Indian curriculum, using materials that correlate to that to ensure that the material that's being presented is relevant to students. So there's two components, an offline pre-generation step to generate some of the files, and the online simulation that students interact with. With the offline component, it will pre-generate the questions that will be asked regarding a given piece of material. So let's say that there is a chapter in the science textbook that's regarding gravity. Then the section regarding gravity will go through two stages. One is subject identification, that is using Google's API, which I think is powered by XLNet, and that will determine the subject of the sentence, or at least the subject, several of them, and that will go into the question generator, and I'll show you that in a moment. Both of these I'll show you in a moment, and that will allow question generation from large volumes of material. So then, given that section regarding gravity, it will try to generate a question that is regarding a given subject in the sentence. So, for example, if you have a sentence that is, gravity is what's responsible for pulling objects closer to Earth, then there could be several subjects in that, being gravity and Earth, and then those would go into the question generator. The question generator takes an answer and a corpus to generate a question from. So it would use that subject as an answer. So then, if your answer was Earth, it might generate a question like, "What does gravity pull things to?" Which in that specific instance would not be a great question we would want to use. But part of that is being filtered by a user, or that would be me in this case, to ensure that the questions are relevant and accurate and useful, but still the ability to generate massive amounts of them using an automated process will save a lot of time. And then regardless, once any of these questions are generated, they'll go through a grammar analysis step. There's libraries available for that. And I'll show you all of the libraries that I'm using here in a moment. And once you find a question that's adequate, that's regarding a given piece of material, then you can put it into a saved location and use that during the online step. The second portion of that then to generate phonemes and facial animations for the 3D character, so that they can speak this information using speech to text. The online portion then being that you use speech to text and text to speech to communicate between the student and the app. The student will can ask a question, and it will analyze the grammatical correctness and either say that was an incorrect way to structure a sentence, or to say that and give them feedback accordingly, or to just ask the question of the material, and then you can return that information and then generate the relevant facial animations. As the question answering step, you don't know what the questions they're going to ask are until they do, right? So you can't pre-generate those. And then as well, it will use text-to-speech to serve up information from the corpus standard text and the questions that we had generated earlier in our offline step. All of these will use the Google Android API powered by WaveNet for the text-to-speech and speech-to-text. And this is targeting an Android device, so those are pretty standard. Right, XLNet. So XLNet to target to ask student questions is actually not. Actually, I ended up trying to go with an approach that was formalized by Facebook research. And I can show that. And language tool is the tool that will be used to verify the grammatical correctness. CMU Sphinx can be used to generate phonemes for the 3D character. FaceFX can be used to take those phonemes or generate phonemes itself. Actually, FaceFX can do that step as well, but can generate 3D animations for the patient, and then there's the model available. Going to cover all of the steps. So this first video will be to illustrate the pipeline of having, here, let me pause this, pipeline of having a question from a given corpus. In this case, it's just an online children's science resource that I'd found. And then it will use that information to identify, it will run it through the subject identification via Google and spit out what it thinks are the subjects, and it will use those subjects to generate questions with. So let's kind of see this in action. So first of all, we have our subject here, or our corpus here, some sentence about magma and what that is. So that'll go into Google, to determine the entities, and then this is the question generation that will take the document that is the corpus sentence as what it's drawing from, and then it takes an answer for a question in order to generate that question, what it thinks the question would be. So in this instance, whenever we generated the probable entities, magma was the first one. So that seems like a good answer for a potential question here. So then it will generate a question, and we'll see if it's valid. It says, what is the hot liquid rock under the surface of the earth? And then the answer there being magma, and then we validate that magma is the hot liquid rock under the surface of the earth. Seems pretty apt. So we would take that and we would run it through the step to validate the grammatical correctness, which there's some problems with right now. All the W isn't capitalized, etc. And then you see they'll do that with the other subjects then were generated here, rock, surface, etc. So the next step would be to automate this so that it just dumps all of those potential subjects in and dumps out all of the questions that are generated. And we'll do this for either each sentence or for the a summarization of the paragraph, and try to get some valid questions out of that. The user will go through and determine which ones would make sense for this. You can see, each one. And some of them aren't totally accurate. That's sort of to be expected as well. We will then progress to the next video here. And this will be showing the next step, that is if we go back real quick, this is answering questions. So then the students can ask a question using speech to text, and this will take a piece of corpus text and try to analyze that and find an answer within that text. Initially, this is actually was going to Wikipedia and pulling from Wikipedia, but just so that this can provide information that uses the provided text and is relevant, I wanted it to pull from a local file that's being included in the app. So I had to make some modifications to that code base to get this working as it does. Just because if there was a children's textbook talking about science or something, and then this went to Wikipedia to answer the question, first of all, the information provided wouldn't be relevant necessarily, and second of all, the way that it's presented and framed would be very technical and obtuse and not very effective for a student who is not, who's a little younger and perhaps doesn't have great English competency. So then if we see this run here, just a quick Python script, and the question that I'm presenting to it is, what are examples of food allergies? And then the corpus that's being provided for it to pull from is, this next bit. Food allergies are fairly common. Around 2% of adults have them. So, if we pull that back up, you can see then that pretty quickly there's a couple different models that can use, but the lightweight model pretty quickly generates the answer. So then so your answer down at the bottom that's generated is well-known food allergies could include gluten, seafood, and peanuts, which is to address the question, what are examples of food allergies? Notice that one comes first because that is the most relevant to the question that's being asked. And you can actually see candidate answers. They'd found relevant information in the 3 of those sentences, but provided them in the order that it did. So that being the case, need to establish a pipeline for question generation and generate questions from the textbook. So generating these questions, running it through the grammar analysis, and then being able to ensure that that's quality material, and then on to just kind of hooking everything up in a wrapper using these speech to text and text to speech components. I think last would be phoneme generation and facial animation, as that seems like it would be helpful, but perhaps dietary when considering the foundation that is the question answering and all the rest. So.